I'm a big proponent of just electing good leaders, okay, and on a local level, right? Because it sort of goes up. You have a bunch of good leaders locally and representatives and things like that. They can hold the president in check, in theory. And so I think that people should focus on electing good local leaders, not voting down party lines. Because when you vote down party line, whether it's Republican or whether it's Democrat, and you just say to them, you have my vote. Well, what you also say to them is you don't have to follow through with anything that you say because there's no incentive to. They know they have your vote. And so sometimes the only way to send this message is to crack a few eggs. And I think California saw that, right? The Republicans flipped 13 counties in California.
Yeah.
Now they're going to win some back. Don't get me wrong. The midterms, it's going to swing toward Democrats. But I think some of those are permanent losses.
Welcome back, listeners, to another episode of the Latino Vote Podcast. This is Mike Madrid flying solo. Chuck Rocha is in, I think, New Orleans today, probably fishing, maybe running guns, doing whatever it is that he does. I don't know. But he sent in a note saying, not going to make it. It's your ship. You commandeer it the way that you want to. And so I'm going to go ahead and take full advantage of that situation. I've invited one of the Chicano Latino voices that I'm most interested in at this moment in time. Somebody who I think has a really good finger on the pulse of Latino culture, particularly Chicanos and Mexican Americans in the Southwestern United States, or at least the West Coast. He is a documentarian. He is an amazing award-winning filmmaker. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit. He is a true Renaissance man. He's an author. I've got a book, which I'm going to be talking about in great detail, walking through. It's called Bomb the Wall, From the Beltway to the Barrio. This cat has worked on Capitol Hill. He has been in, grew up in gang culture, knows everything about everything you need to know, from how tight your Pendleton needs to be stretched to how low your Lowrider needs to be, to how to move a movie through Hollywood, how to move a bill through Capitol Hill. Brandon Loran Maxwell is somebody who is redefining, I think, our culture in the American mainstream. And we're going to talk to him about everything that he's working on. But I have every confidence in the next hour or so, you're going to get a real treat in terms of understanding the emergent voices that are driving and changing Latino culture. So Brandon, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Mike, for the kind introduction. I'm happy to be here and always enjoy talking to you.
Now, we talk a lot about politics, you and I, and you were one of the first people who not only was saying, Trump's going to win, but you were explaining from a cultural perspective why that was happening long before everybody else was. And we're going to get to that in just a sec. But I want people to know, and I want you to talk about your journey a little bit. I'm going to do a really bad thumbnail sketch of it.
Sure.
But you grew up on some pretty rough streets in Portland, Oregon, in a Mexican American community, a strong, big Mexican American community, incidentally, which I was learning about. You served some time. Think you're honest and open about that. We can talk about that a little bit and how it formed your life and your perspective. Somehow you amazingly get onto Capitol Hill and start observing both political parties. And you very astutely articulate why you don't feel at home in either party. And you have been a very strong but constructive critic of both parties. And you have done your level best to push the boundaries of Latino culture in the established Hollywood framework by launching your own documentaries, your own movies, your own creative work. And now you've compiled a book that takes all of your writings over the years and puts them into one really remarkable collection of essays about what it means to be Latino, Mexican American, Chicano at this moment. Is that fair to say? Is that about
Sure.
the right trajectory?
Yeah. It's kind of funny because with a lot of the different things I do, film, politics, media in general, it's, most people don't realize how much of where I am today was driven by necessity. It wasn't like I set out and I said, this is the course I'm going to take. I had no clue I was going to be in media or film or anything like that, because like you said, I was pretty wayward growing up. I dropped out of high school when I was 17. I was carrying a gun all the time. I grew up in an area that had a lot of gangs that were exported out of Los Angeles. I got courted into a gang based in Los Angeles. And I knew a lot of guys out of LA. My old set was out of LA. And so the guys I was running with, that's who I ran with. And all those early guys that brought those first gangs into Oregon, I knew them all. And so I got involved in the 80s in that life, all the way through the 90s, dropped out of high school. And I had a principal that started calling me pretty regularly, talking me in, trying to get me back into school. I ignored her calls for about a year, and she kept calling. She kept saying, "Brandon, you need to come back to school." And she convinced me to come back in. And she basically said, I can help you still graduate, but you're a year behind. And if you're going to come back in, my one ask is you have to be in an arts program. You have to take theater, or you have to take dance, or you're not coming back in at all. And I was like, well, I'm not going to dance. And I guess I'll do theater. And when I got into the theater program, I was like, well, I'm not going to act. I was sort of stubborn, like I am still a little bit stubborn, but and they said, well, you write rap songs, you're really into that, and you write poetry and all that. Have you ever thought about writing a play? And I was like, I never thought about it, And so they gave me all these books, and it was there that I was exposed to the arts and my love for theater. My love for theater turned into a love for film. So that always stuck with me. And, I was in and out of jail a lot in my 20s. And I was at one point facing a pretty lengthy sentence for a bar fight I had gotten into, where the other guy was the nephew of a district judge. I didn't realize I had punched him. And so they were kind of trying to throw the book at me. And I'd really made the decision at that point in my life, that I think I was ready to weed out the drugs and the life I was living and sort of find another way of living. Right. And
How
I
old is
actually,
this time? How old is this?
I was 26 at that time, and my whole life was partying. And I was involved with the gangs for all up until that point, and also while I was locked up. But I knew that I could do more, and I wrote an essay in there, and I won a national prize from Writer's Digest actually. And I didn't. They never knew I was actually locked up.
Really?
But I had a lot of. I think that motivated me to think back to high school, and I was like, well, why am I not in writing? That's what got me through high school to graduate after dropping out. That's what I should do. And so when I got out, I couldn't get a job anywhere. They let me go from the gas station. I just couldn't get a job anywhere because of my felony. And so I went to college just so I could get free student loan money. And that's what I went to college for. I was like, I need to pay rent,
Yeah.
and I was crashing on people's floors at the time. I didn't have a car. I didn't have a house. I didn't have an education. I had nothing. And so I went to college, and then one day I took a speech communication class, and I ended up getting a scholarship. And so I stuck with it a little bit, and I thought political science sounded interesting. And I ended up landing some internships out in Washington, D.C. off some essays I wrote. And I just fell in love with like the opinion writing circuit in the policy world. And I stayed out there doing that, working with different think tanks. And I started getting published a fair amount in places like The Hill, the Washington Times, Washington Examiner, all these places. And I loved it. It honed me a lot. And I was very rough around the edges for a long time. But if you go to enough DC parties, you start to pick up the conduct and, kind of how you are. And so eventually I figured it out and moderated myself a lot. But eventually I ran into a wall. And that wall was I could never really talk about Mexican American related issues. And that's always been something that's been near and dear to my heart because of who I grew up around and just sort of being stuck in the middle as myself, right? I'm half and half. And so eventually when the time was right, fast forward a lot of years, when COVID hit, I thought it was the perfect time to launch a media company because I saw these other media companies taking a hit. And really in the marketplace, you either need a really revolutionary idea or you need a disruption. And there was a big disruption happening in the marketplace. So I could look at all these models that were breaking down and not working at the time and try and do something different. And so I went and raised some venture capital and started the media company. And from there, I made the film, did the deal with Apple TV and all these different places. And so
Truly remarkable story. I mean, how you go from, having a gun with you at all times, coming in and out of jail, and then seeking venture capital to start a media firm on your own after sleeping on floors and working on the Hill. Some of your inspirations were writers like PJ O'Rourke, right? I mean, brilliant writers who were also very critical of the system as well. They were satirical type of, but insightful observers of the American moment.
Yeah, no, I really gravitated toward guys like PJ O'Rourke, Christopher Hitchens, Hunter S. Thompson, all these sort of political writers, a lot of them satirists and or polemicists, Mencken, all these guys. Like, I just love polemicism, but I love the art of polemicism. And today, what you have is a bunch of really bad polemicists online that are just sort of vicious for the sake of being vicious. But what I fell in love with when it comes to politics was sort of that, um, the art of debate, but then afterwards, you're still getting along, right? You can still get along. You can really tear into each other's political views, break them down, be funny, have a few jabs, but you don't hate each other. And so sometimes I think there's a lot of hatred toward one another. Like, each side accuses the other side of being Nazis and things like that. And so I'm not a fan of the modern incarnation of politics. And sometimes, even though I'm relatively young, I do feel old because I feel like I come from that old school side of Washington D.C. That's where I learned politics. And now all the guys I looked up to are dead. Christopher Hitchens no longer there. PJ O'Rourke's no longer there. And so
It's good. It's remarkable because I think I was in DC a little bit before you, and again, it was rare to be a Latino working on the Hill, working in politics. But a lot of the intellectual movement that I was inspired by, from the Buckleys of the world, to I mean, on and on and on. The conservatism at that time, love it or hate it, it was an intellectual movement.
yeah,
It was an intellectual basis for it. That, of course, has completely collapsed along with most of our public discourse. And you're a thinker, which is why I was immediately attracted to you. And I reached out to you, I think is the way this happened, because I saw the trailer for this movie you put out called American Homeboy. And tell us about American Homeboy. What is the movie? How did it come to be? And then tell us about its launch and how it was received.
well, I had written an essay about sort of the history of Mexican American gangs and the impact they've had on culture that a lot of people aren't aware of, and sort of as a byproduct. And I was always fascinated by it because I was involved in that world for so long and I knew so many people. And sometimes the way that it was portrayed in media was not how I remembered it necessarily, right? At least not in its totality. It was a lot more nuanced than it was often portrayed, because there's sort of one dimensional in its depiction on media. So I wrote an essay called Cholos Are as American as Apple Pie, and it went viral. And it did really well. And I kept thinking to myself, it'd be interesting to put some visuals to this. At some point, maybe make a film. Even, I hadn't made a film at that point yet. Well, I made little short films, but the problem was the archive footage. There's limited archive footage, and what archive footage existed was owned by universities like UCLA that wanted to charge an arm and a leg to use it. It just by happenstance, I ran across a bunch of old footage in an archive in California that was ran by a guy who used to have his own cable access station show, and he'd go out and film stuff. And he left all his reels with the city. And so I went to
Latino?
he was, yeah, Juan Espinosa. He had his own show, and he filmed all this stuff through the 70s and 80s. It was just beautiful,
In the city of San Jose.
all around the Bay Area, Hayward, and just everywhere. Mostly the Bay Area, though. And so I went to them and I said, "Hey, I'd love to make a film with this." And they said, "Well, the reels were given to us. We can't give you the green light, but if you can find Juan, we don't know where he's at." Well, I hunted him down and found him in Oakland, and I talked to him and I said, "I'd love to make this film," and he signed on. He was like, "Yeah, I'd love to do it." So we started making the film, and then he passed away. He died. Never got to see the final film, and his son died as well. And so I got left with all the footage, all the reels, everything, and he had given me the rights to everything. And so I used AI to restore all of the footage from that time because a lot of it was different resolution, a lot of it was damaged. And so I spent about a year and a half using AI, just restoring kind of meticulously. To put it in perspective, we had 20 terabytes of footage that we drew from for the film. That's a lot of footage for people that just understand how much it takes to even get a terabyte. And so once we did that, I raised a little money to find a camera guy at Netflix and convince him if we could use his equipment or if he would come and be a part of this. And we ended up convincing him, and so we had a $50,000 red that we got to use, and started setting up interviews to sort of tell this story. And my goal really was to make a little documentary to put on my website. That was the goal. I had no clue that we were going to land a deal with Apple TV and that we were going to sell out 35 cities. I had no clue. And we were selling out theaters left and right. And it turned into sort of a phenomenon. And between that and my company, it played a big deal in launching more film projects.
Yeah, I remember watching online and seeing all these lines, a lot of veteranos, but it was also a lot of young people. I mean, it was a whole range of
Yeah.
people, lines around the block to come in and see this movie, American Homeboy.
Which is it's a documentary too, which is the weird part, right? How often do you
Right.
see, yeah, theaters sell out for a documentary film? But you know what it said? It said a lot of things, which is that it said that history is sorely underrepresented in media and academia, right? The fact that you had lines like that, and that was never my intention. So I learned that in the process.
What was the intention? What did you learn?
Well, my intention was to spotlight the culture and to sort of give explanation to the nuances of this subculture. And I was aware that a lot of schools don't teach this culture. I grew up on the West Coast, so we had Chicano, uh, you know, classes where I was in school, right? So I never knew the feeling of not having it necessarily.
Right.
But I know when I travel to other states, a lot of this is like a foreign history to them. And so, I wanted to spotlight the culture and explain some of the nuances, but I just had no idea that all the colleges would reach out to me in high schools and things like that and ask to integrate it into their curriculum. And I just didn't. I had no clue.
When did you know it was going to be a big deal or was a big deal?
I think after probably about 5 theaters sold out, I was like, wow. And it was outside of LA, because it started in LA. We just did a screening. We got really good reviews. And then we did another theater, and then another theater, and then another theater. And, to be fair, like at first theaters wouldn't play the movie. So what I did was I raised a little money, like not a lot, like $5,000 to rent out the theater. So I would put up $3,000 or so to rent a theater for a 2-hour block. And then I would sell the tickets. And what would happen is I'd sell out every time. We would sell it out and we'd make a little money back. And then we'd use that money to do another theater because people kept saying, are you going to do a screening here, screening there? So we ended up doing Sacramento. We did 500 people at the Automobile Museum. We did San Jose. We did LA multiple times. We did everywhere, all over the United States. But what happened was eventually theaters came to us, and they wouldn't let us rent them out anymore because they saw we were selling out. Like I went to a big theater and over in California, which I won't name, but they wouldn't let me rent it anymore. They're like, we'll play it, but now you have to split it with us. And I think that's when I knew. I was like, wow, this is much bigger than I ever thought it would be.
Yeah.
And so,
Where can people see American Homeboy?
well, you can watch American Homeboy on Apple TV or on Tubi for free or on the Daily Chella YouTube page, which I just put it out there, and we just hit like 150,000 views over whatever 10 days or something. And it'll live there, and I'll continue to make other projects. And yeah, so in fact, I just did a new series that we could talk about that later. But
Yeah, or we can talk about it now. I mean, why don't you let us know what you're working on now? I want to talk about the book and then politics too. There's just so much I want to visit with you on, but let's talk about this, what you just put out.
well, I wanted to continue doing a little film work in between some other bigger projects. And so we just finished a little series, like a little web series, although we did just sign a deal. It's going to go to major streaming later this year, but we already put it on our YouTube. We're doing a new episode every Monday, and it's called Defiant History. And it's sort of an extension of American Homeboy in that we are exploring different subcultures that were outlaw subcultures at one point, and they ended up becoming mainstream American subcultures and really a part of Americana. So, for example, one of our episodes, we speak with former graffiti artists who were outlaws in the 70s and 80s, and now they're in charge of the public art wall for Venice, and they work for the government. and they run this public art wall. And so we talk about club jackets and plaques. And I meet some guys who were in prison for 20, 30 years who now are in charge of a huge fashion brand that's worldwide. And so it's sort of a mix of using artifacts and personal stories to explore how outlaw culture is very American in some ways, right? It's like that American story. And obviously some of that's personal from my own upbringing, but I just feel like these are stories that I love to spotlight. So
And how many episodes is it?
we did a pilot. So we did 3 for our pilot season.
Okay.
So right now we're doing an episode a week on Daily Cella on the YouTube. And so you can go to the Daily Cella YouTube to see the first episode right now. We just dropped that the day before yesterday. New one next Monday. And then otherwise later this year, it's going to major streaming. But I can't say the services yet until they give me the green light. But so it'll be available also on streaming at some point.
Let's transition with that because I want to talk about the book, which I've got a copy of. It's called Bomb the Wall, which I think is a great title. It's a compilation of essays, which I love this type of book because I don't read it straight through. I bounce around and look for titles of essays that kind of sound interesting. I'll read 3 or 4 at a time. Sometimes I'll sit down and just kind of devour a bunch. I, dog-ear some of the chapters because I'll want to come back and reread them again 3, 4 times. Mine's all underlined and highlighted. And tell us about the inspiration. I mean, you're a writer, you're a storyteller, Brandon. I mean, that's the beauty. I think the gift that your principal gave you was this realization is that your contribution to this world is going to be through creativity. Your creativity is what's going to drive the narrative of your life. And what I think you've come to realize is you're a writer, but you're a storyteller. You do it in a number of different mediums now. And this compilation of essays in many ways is it's part journal, but it's also part like memoir of a community, memoir of a people, because it starts, the first essay is you getting jumped into a gang. Like, it starts hard, right? It's like, here it is, here's life. But then it also has like your essays when you were writing for the Washington Post, like 30 essays in. And it's like, this is just a fascinating array, a microcosm of our community, all in one guy's brain. So talk to us about the book, Bomb the Wall. How did it come to be? Why did you decide to do a book? And I know Amazon, it's available on Amazon. You got to pick up the book. It's doing really well on Amazon right now. It hit the bestseller list as soon as it came out. But talk to us about the inspiration and the origin story of the book.
Well, you're very nice in your description of the book, Mike. It's really just I've tried to reconcile the fact that I've always felt like I'm a writer first. But like you said, I found myself in many other mediums just creating. Like I had a media company in Portland for a while that was hiring me just to give them ideas. Like I'd show up there, they'd pay me, and they're like, just give us your ideas. And I think that helped me realize too that I don't know. I guess, I am a creative person. I mean, I played in a band for a long time also, and that type of thing. So, but writing's my first love, and I love guys like Ernest Hemingway and Fyodor Dostoevsky and all these types of people. But it's very difficult to make a living just as a writer. And my recommendation to other writers is, try to find another way to apply that creativity, right? Because you usually have a creative mind in some way if you can. What led to the book was I kept getting people asking me, where can I read the different things that you've wrote over the years? Because they're sort of scattered everywhere. And I've bounced from blog to blog, and some newspapers have changed their sections or revamped with the internet and all this, but I've saved most of the stuff that I've written over the years. And so being a fan like you of collections, like I said, guys like PJ O'Rourke and Christopher Hitchens who just sit around and write essays all the time and then put out collections every year. I was like, well, maybe I'll just put out a collection. We're in a time when I don't have to go through a traditional publisher. I can just put it together. I have my own little audience. I can just sell it over time. It doesn't have to be the main thing that I push. But at least people can get some insight into my thought process a little bit, and maybe an introduction for down the road when I do a bigger book. And so I just put together this collection, and this is like a quarter of what I have. And even this is still, it's got a fair amount of essays. I think it's got 50 plus essays, and it's about 300 pages or so. And I got another one coming out next year. I have a lot of stuff that I've written over the years. I don't think a lot of people knew because they only know me from the film.
Right.
And so I wanted to kind of get it out there. And obviously the title is meant to be provocative. and I have strong pro-immigration views. I always have. But really, it's a metaphor. When you read the book, it's about breaking down political walls as well, right? Not just immigration, the dumb border wall, but political walls and social walls and personal walls, because that's been such a factor in my own life, right? Breaking down those walls. I love surrounding myself with different types of people.
Yeah. You kind of collect different voices and people and you engage them in a way that, again, is very thoughtful. You're a thinker. And I love, that's one of the things I really love about your brain is you're not afraid of, in fact, you seek out opposite opinions because you want to be challenged. You want to wrestle with these things. You've always demonstrated a proclivity to change your mind. You are dug in and you're stubborn, but it is, and I say that lovingly because I'm the same way, but it's a function of you having spent a lot of time thinking about it. But that doesn't mean that it's cemented. And I think you probably enjoy like a new thought, a new approach to bomb out some of those long held beliefs and say, wow, maybe this is something I need to re-examine.
I'm a bit of a masochist. And,
Yeah.
in boxing, you know how when the other boxer feels it, another boxer feels it when they smile after you hit them, right? That's how you know you actually stung them. It's just a natural body reaction. When a boxer smiles, they felt it.
Hmm.
And so it's sort of like the same way with my own political views. I love to smile when somebody really makes me change an opinion that I thought I had, right? It's like that, just that punch in the jaw is like, you got me there. I thought I had really thought that through and I was wrong. Or, just any given things. I don't have to agree with everybody I surround myself with, but to me, it's boring to surround yourself with people that only agree with you. And if you believe in something, how much good are you really doing if you're not surrounding yourself with people who disagree with you, if you're not trying to convert or convince people of things?
So I'm going to ask you a really, really, really big question because I think it's important as we segue into kind of keeping on focus with the book, but also kind of politics, which you and I wrestle with a lot in the best of ways. Where are we at in this political moment as a country first? I'm going to ask you that as a country, and then I'm going to ask you that as Latino.
Well, I'm concerned for, I think, the lack of humanity in politics right now in terms of how we view each other. This feels unprecedented in, I think, the contention that exists and the demagoguery that exists that has been perpetuated a lot because of social media. And I think there's an incentive sometimes to be as over the top as possible because you get more views and get more clicks and things like that. And I don't think it's been good for our discourse. Like I'd mentioned earlier, I love the old school of, I think it's fine to be polemic. I'm plenty polemic. But there's a difference between being polemic or constructive or critiquing or satirizing and just hating somebody who has a different opinion and just writing them off, not even trying to convince them of anything different, just writing them off. And I think that that's a mistake because as a society, I mean, what made us the great country we are, and the Western way of thinking really was thinking, like the Enlightenment, engaging, having discussions, and critiquing things. It wasn't just writing off people who disagree with you necessarily, calling them a bunch of idiots. Now there are people that do a lot of idiotic things. Don't get me wrong, but it's I just think I'm concerned about the discourse, the level of discourse in this country, and I think that there's a lot of people who I don't think they take times to wrestle some of these issues like maybe and I do, right? And I've read your stuff, and when I put together that mock trailer that I showed you not too long ago, I went and listened to a lot of your speeches, and you've clearly thought through a lot of these things also, and you've sort of ruminated, and your positions come from thinking about these things. It doesn't come from you just want to grow your social media following. Maybe the two live side by side, but there's still something there. And so I just feel like there's a real void in seeing each other's humanity and having an intellectual curiosity to understand the issue you're talking about.
Are you optimistic about the American project?
I'm always optimistic. I wouldn't. I am not a doomsday guy. I think as long as there are people that can make arguments out there, there's always hope, right? Like as long as there's people who who are trying to, I think, set an example and create some level of, I don't know what the word is that I'm looking for, but I just feel like as long as people out there who have good intentions and can go out there and lead, culture can always change. I mean, I'll use Trump as an example. I'm not a fan of Trump, but you can see the impact that he's had, and that's one guy, okay, in one direction. And so, what's to say that you can't have one guy that helps things move in a different direction? And so that's why I'm optimistic. All right. So it seems really, really bleak. I think it speaks to the problem that there are political parties right now, right? There's sort of a void in leadership in both political parties. On the right, they gave up a long time ago. They don't have anybody that stands up to Trump necessarily. They just sort of went along and now accept everything that he wants to do. And the left is sort of detached and they don't have any leaders waiting in the wings. But it took a long time to get to this point. And, anything's possible with the right leader.
What does that mean for Latinos in politics? With a void, I think you've encapsulated it perfectly. On both sides, there's this leadership void. Right at the moment we're emerging, right, as we're going to be taking over as the stewards of this country, this idea of its institutions, as they're crumbling, as an older generation is tearing them down. What is the moment calling Latinos to do?
I think the moment, and whether or not they do it is a different story. I think it's important for Latinos to be able to take the reins, understand their voting power, and understanding that they can sway and have a huge influence on local politics and national politics. But I also think it's important for them to embrace the American dream as well. I don't want to discourage people from believing in the American experiment and what it's capable of. I always stress to my friends, you should know American history and Mexican American history and Mexican history, all of it, because it's all relevant to you. And there's a lot of great things that this country offers as well. And if you don't understand those things, you can't fight to preserve those things. And I think what a classic example of this is freedom of speech, right? I'm big on freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is really important. And I always tell my friends, even though it's often typecast as this super right wing, idea, it's embedded in our Constitution, and it played a huge role in the civil rights movement, right? In protecting a lot of those people to speak out against the government, march and critique the government, right? And I think we forget that sometimes on some of those protections. So I think it's important to understand the Constitution. This doesn't have to be just white conservatives in the South that celebrate these protections in the Constitution. And there was a time when the left were about this, right? Like the liberals at one time were celebrated free speech, like during the 60s and things like that. Now both parties, I would say, are anti-speech. They both parties have iterations of being anti-speech. And so I think that's a danger. And so I think it's on Latinos who have this power as a voting bloc to not just represent, their own interests or bring sort of their own experiences and voices to the table, but to also do it in a way to where they also understand and show everybody they also understand the country, like the way it was founded, right?
Do we still have too much of a minority mentality as Latinos?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, absolutely.
Talk about that, brother.
Well, I think there is sort of there's a mentality of always being left out and always being an outsider, as you mentioned, and as a result, it sort of discourages people from doing anything, and you sort of wait for somebody to save you. But I think with myself, like I said, like I always say, I would rather build my own castle than stand at the gate of someone else's, begging them to let me inside. Why are we standing at the gate of someone else's castle? We don't need to anymore.
Amen.
We can go out and build our own thing. And that's what I did. And we live in a world with technology where it makes it possible. And so I think this mentality of feeling like we have to ask for permission, it doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist anymore. And so right now it's a mental prison. It's a mental prison, people who feel that way. And this is another reason why I say that sometimes it's good for people to step outside of their own bubble, because I do think that in a lot of communities, there are leaders who the way they maintain power is by convincing people to stay in those communities and not venture out. And what happens is you perpetuate this cycle of um, victimhood and of grief and feeling like you can't do anything. And I see it a lot in Black and brown communities, unfortunately. And so organizations and certain leaders just depend on keeping people there. And so I think people should seek out, you know,
especially
it,
in our political power structures.
correct. Yeah.
There's value to the politicians in keeping and perpetuating this idea that if we just got the Democratic Party to figure it out, or if we just got the Republican Party to figure it out, and I'm the person, if you just empowered me and amplified my voice, and it's like, wait a second, anybody looking for the Democratic or Republican Party to do the right thing is nuts. Like, you don't
Yeah.
understand. Those are just vessels. They're constructs. And until we start challenging that as Latinos, we're going to still keep getting this same nonsense that we've always gotten. I'm starting to see this break in California, by the way, and not as fast as it should have. And it should have happened 25 years ago. But when am I talking with legislators? I had dinner with a few legislators a couple of weeks ago. There's this realization that it's like, wait a second. We've always looked up to and empowered all of these other voices to speak on our behalf and carry this small subset of issues. And now it's kind of like they're all your issues. You've been saying that for forever. Well, why don't you act like it? Like, take them on and challenge that idea, that notion. And I think that in large part is why the Democrats got so swept out. Is the community is not buying that old model of thinking anymore.
Yeah.
And I saw it on the Biden campaign specifically. I think they were trying to make adjustments during the Harris phase. It's like, okay, we get it. We see it. We'll make the adjustments. We'll adapt. But it's still based off of this hierarchy of whose name you had and what contract you have. And everybody's incentivized to play into the victimized minority model of politics. And our community just wasn't having it anymore.
No, I agree. And I think that, this is why I've always said, like, there's a huge problem with just voting down party lines. I'm a big proponent of just electing good leaders. Okay. And on a local level, right? Because it sort of goes up. You have a bunch of good leaders locally and representatives and things like that. They can hold the president in check in theory. And so I think that people should focus on electing good local leaders, not voting down party lines. Because when you vote down party line, whether it's Republican or whether it's Democrat, and you just say to them, you have my vote. Well, what you also say to them is you don't have to follow through with anything that you say because there's no incentive to. They know they have your vote. And so sometimes the only way to send this message is to crack a few eggs. And I think California saw that, right? The Republicans flipped 13 counties in California.
Yeah.
And they're not going to win those back. Now, they're going to win some back. Don't get me wrong. Midterms, it's going to swing toward Democrats. But I think some of those are permanent losses. Now, I think we're seeing some retraction for support for Trump because of the way that he's carried out some of the immigration raids. But it's been fascinating because I always pay attention to some of these big urban Latino podcasts because I know a lot of these guys, and some of them have some really big audiences. Some of them, hundreds of thousands of guys that listen to them on YouTube. And I'm always sort of paying attention to them in the streets as to what they're saying. And one of the things I'm hearing is, yeah, I really hate what Trump's doing with immigration, even though I supported him. But man, I still can't stand the left and a lot of that woke stuff that they push.
I want you to share more of that, brother, because this audience especially is it's a very highly tuned political audience.
Yeah.
But I don't think that a lot of our folks, and I know I'm going to get a lot of blowback on this in the comments, and that's okay, but really understand how much our culture has changed. And I'll never forget a conversation you and I had last summer when you were like, Mike, there's a Lowrider show in Long Beach. You need to come with me and see how strong Trump is
Yeah.
in these communities. I was like, you're out of your mind, bro. Like, I'm seeing the data, and you're like, listen to me. Like, get your head out of the polls. I know you're seeing it. This is going to explain it all. And man, you were absolutely right. Like, you nailed it. And so talk a little bit about that. And I didn't mean to interrupt you because you're getting some good stuff there.
Yeah. I always tell, like, the most important thing in politics for me, if you're just stepping back and you're looking at the forest, is to remember that social media is not real life. And I think that's the biggest mistake that pollsters and people make. And it's easy to do, right? If you make a tweet and you've got hundreds of thousands of likes and shares, it's easy to believe that you have the majority opinion.
Right.
But most or a lot of people, especially in Black and brown communities, are not online as much or on Twitter or in these bubbles because they're working jobs trying to pay the bills.
Right.
They're lower on the economic ladder. They don't have the expenditure of time to just spend all day on Twitter. And so I get feedback and hear thoughts from people at things like car shows, because I know a lot of people, especially in the Latino community, who, if they have a little time to spare outside of work, they're going to use it going to a car show and showing off their ride that they work on throughout the year. They're not going to use it spending all day on Twitter. And so that's why I say I love listening to these podcasts and I love car shows, because I learn a lot about what's going on at these car shows. And when I was in Long Beach talking to people about politics, this was a massive car show that I was at. I didn't find a single Kamala supporter. Everybody was either a Trump supporter or they hated both parties. And, I had been seeing that brewing for a while. And even I defended Trump on a number of things. And there's some things that I'll still defend him on. But I've never liked his immigration stance. I've always thought it's just anti-immigrant rhetoric, and the way the Republican Party has gone since really the Tea Party in terms of the way they talk about immigrants. It's just been a total put off for me. But I saw this coming, and I remember I've written about it, and I'd mentioned it a few times to people like you and things like that. So I wasn't surprised when Latinos swing the way they did. I didn't think it was going to be 50%, right? It's like 49% is what it ended up being. But I knew it would be, 43, 44%, which is still, back to George Bush levels.
Right.
So, I mean, Bush won the Hispanic vote 43, 44%, 2 elections in a row. And really, I always thought it was the Tea Party, when they turned from economic issues to immigration issues, that began to push people away from the Republican Party. Because if you remember, you had, of course, you had Reagan that did amnesty, and then you had Bush that talked about compassionate conservatism. He wasn't anti-immigrant like what you see now.
I was doing those campaigns. This guy loved immigrants, loved Mexicanos especially.
He spoke Spanish. He was great around it. I mean, everybody loves to characterize Bush as one way or the other, but look, when Bush swung an axe, I believed it. When he cracked a beer, I believed it. Unlike John Kerry. And it's always been a problem with the left. Right. And so the right just is very good at producing these candidates, even if they come from privilege, that just relate to regular people. And the thing about regular people is, most of the time they don't care if you have money or not. They care about culture and whether or not you can sit down and crack a beer or swing an axe. And that's what Democrats don't understand.
Say more about the left. And again, this is a left-leaning audience. I'm not gonna, but Chuck's not here, and I love Chuck, and we're gonna talk a little bit about Chuck and the Democratic Party, because Chuck will bring on his friends here, and they'll say the whole problem that we've got here is, our politicians don't go to the carne asada barbecues enough. They don't go to enough quinceañeras. I mean, what do you say to that? As somebody who really understands and sells and markets to the culture, what do you say to that?
Yeah, I just, you don't have to go to those things to have an appeal, for one. I mean, it's like, I feel like that is the political thing to do. Politically speaking, that's exactly what I expect a politician to do. I think it's the more important thing is, I use the word Latinx because that's my favorite word to pick on. I've never heard the word outside of media or academia or activist circles, ever. Never once have I ever been down at the taco stand and heard that word. And that should be an indicator to any just semi-observant person that it's not something everyday people use. And so, but yet you go to academia, you hear it all the time. And you sort of like this, I don't understand the logic of erasing 99% of people to appease 1% of people. It doesn't make sense.
Especially in a campaign.
And, I think from a Chicano standpoint, we're probably the largest critics of that word in the Latino community. It's fascinating because I remember getting an email saying, hey, will you talk to us as a media outlet about Latinx lowrider culture? And the first thing that went through my mind was, I don't know what Latinx lowrider culture is. I don't remember anybody talking about Latinx lowrider culture. I know Mexican American lowrider culture and Chicano lowrider culture, but Latinx, what does that mean? Were people marching in the civil rights era Latinx rights? The truth is some of the problems that exist with gender neutrality, and I know that Democrats want to appease everyone. You can appease those just by being specific, right? So Mexican American is a gender neutral term. Mexican is a gender neutral term. Puerto Rican is a gender neutral term. And so you have to step back and look at the bigger picture. What does this really mean? And I think for skeptics like me, I step back and I say, no, what this is this is a block. This is creating a block so you can steer everybody in one direction. And as an extension of that, the word has come to encompass more than just being gender neutral. I know your whole set of political values if you address me as Latinx. And so that's part of the problem that I have with it. And I think that politicians and corporations alike tried to use it. It didn't work. But I think that's just one example of just being out of touch in general. When I toured with the movie and went to different colleges, I found myself in a number of debates, as you might think, with faculty on the back in the back end, talking politics. You know who the people were that I debated with the most? The white professors.
Yeah.
It was the white liberals. They were the ones that just could not accept the fact that a lot of the Chicano, a lot of the Mexican American, a lot of the Latino community lean culturally conservative in a lot of areas. And I would have people sit and argue with me all night. And I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I'm telling you from somebody who comes from that community,
Right.
how most of them feel about this subject. But I never had that discussion with any Mexican Americans or Latinos. And so there's just sort of this pompous approach that liberals take sometimes.
Well, you particularly did not like the Harris Waltz ticket. Waltz kind of rubbed you the wrong way.
Yeah, I didn't like Walls at all.
Waltz?
I knew.
Not Waltz, because it's just like this, Pa Kettle is just a harmless old dude from the Midwest Rust Belt. You're like, this guy is not gonna connect at all. And you were right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
But you felt it at a guttural, instinctual level. You're like, this ticket is not gonna connect.
Yeah.
What was it? What were you seeing?
Yeah, it's funny because like I actually didn't have a huge problem with Kamala. I mean, I think she's inept as a politician. I don't think she's the greatest politician, but most people aren't, right? It's hard to be a politician. So that's one thing. Walls, though, to me, was a total phony from the outset, just for the sake of being a little bit polemic here. I think the first mistake that Democrats made was he had a huge tagline that took off on social media and he showed a little fire and they just instantly thought, this is our guy. They never thought to look at the voting patterns in his state to say, hey, look, working class people in his own district didn't even vote for him. He won because of the city and because of affluent people. That should have been the first indicator because the people who knew him best, those working class people who he was purportedly representing, didn't support him in large numbers. And so, I think the problem with Wallace is the same problem that Kerry had. When he went out duck hunting or whatever it was he was talking about, I didn't believe it. When I look at him, what I see is a left-wing prosecutor from San Francisco. It's her idea of what the working class in the Midwest is, right? This sort of Elmer Fudd looking guy. And so she tried to find someone who's wearing a flannel, who's duck hunting, who da-da-da-da-da. And she thought people were dumb and were going to fall for it. And I think that the real working class people said, no, you don't have to walk around duck hunting in a flannel, looking like Elmer Fudd all day to win working class votes. And I think that was the mistake that the left made. And I think it was another example of how detached they are from regular working class people because they just sort of have this stereotype in mind. It's like Mexicans, right? Like do you think to win the Latino vote, you have to go drive around a lowrider? Some people might think that, but news is you don't.
And Democrats think that.
I
That's
know.
what it is. That's this idea that if you just go to more, quinceañeras, let's go just show up at more quinceañeras and like
Yeah.
Joe Biden going to the Mexican restaurant with mariachi in the background in South Tucson. Like that. It's like this symbolism has replaced substance. That's why they've lost working class people. And working class people know that. Like we're not dumb. Right?
Yeah.
It's like you can see it, you can smell it, and it's not that you're offensive with it, it's you're so unrelatable with it.
Yes.
It's like you're the nerdy kid trying to walk into like the cool kid class
Yeah.
and acting like you're cool, and everyone's just kind of like, "Who's this dude?"
Yeah.
Right? Like that's who Democrats are in our communities now.
Well, I'll tell you, Mike, and this isn't always popular to say, but when I toured those 35 cities or so with the film, even though it had started out just about the film, I had so many people talking to me about politics. In South Tucson was one of them. Had some great tacos out there, by the way. My brother lives in Tucson,
Yeah.
so I like Arizona. And so I was everywhere, but as far away as Maine, right? I spent almost 3 weeks, I think, in Michigan, all across the state, every major city you can think of in Michigan. Spent time in Maine, all over the United States. Had lots of discussions. I knew Democrats were really in for a problem when almost everywhere, after talking with people, somebody would inevitably bring up, I can't stand what the schools are teaching my kids right now. And it caught me by surprise. Now I know that there are people that don't like some of those things, but I was like, this felt like this was a culturally conservative viewpoint that was an extension from a lot of these Latino communities. Now the left, when they hear that type of thing, they decide, well, they're just a bunch of bigots. Well, you can't write that off. You can't just write everybody off as a bunch of bigots. If it's a concern for people across the US in black and brown communities, then it's something you have to address. And I'll give you an example. When I was in North Hollywood doing a podcast, there was a huge protest outside the school about, I think, one of the gender books they had going on there. And I was asking this podcaster what it was about. And one of the things I noticed about the protesters is none of them were white. They weren't a bunch of white hillbillies with pitchforks from the South. This is North Hollywood, and they were Armenian, they were black, they were Mexican, but no news coverage. And so if you say that to the left and you say, I think there's a real issue here, like there's some cultural conservatism that isn't happy with some of the things you're pushing, they'll say, oh, they're just a bunch of paid agitators. They won't even entertain the idea that it could be that some of the stances that you have are not that popular with regular people. And you're losing 99% of people to try to appease this 1% of people who live in your bubble with you. Now, I'm not saying that people can't respect different viewpoints and lifestyles and things like that. But to just write people off as, oh, well, you're a right wing bigot, if you think that, that's danger. And I think that's a big reason why Democrats have begun to bleed some of the voters they have, because anyone who disagrees with them is a racist, they're homophobe, they're sexist, they're out of date. And I just think at a certain point, it tunes people out. People just tune out.
It gets back to the free speech thing that you were talking about earlier, which is you can have free speech as long as you agree with me.
Exactly. And, the other thing is it's going to lead to a huge pendulum swing. And I think we've seen it where now you see conservatives. To me, some of the language that I see conservatives using online just to be provocative
Yeah.
is gross. It's disgusting. It's gross. And you never would have saw that from conservatives 25 years ago.
Right.
And they do it just to shock. And it's an inevitable pushback of feeling like, well, I'm just being called a bigot anyways by the left. So I'm just going to say something bigoted. And so it's just this odd thing where you have the left and the right at each other's throats. And culturally, it's just eroded us as a culture. And so it goes back to just lack of civility.
Where is this all heading? I know I asked you this before. Maybe it's
Yeah.
unfair to ask again, but I mean, I've enjoyed the thought process and the real life experiences because, unlike me, who just kind of sits around and reads and thinks about this stuff, like you're talking to people every day. You're filming people, like you're interviewing people. You're running with people who are living this and articulating this, and that's why I enjoy our conversation so much. Is because you'll be like, last Tuesday I was at this place, and we were, and these guys were having this conversation. And you have this ability to kind of just be a sponge to kind of soak up where the culture that where real people are at, not the political establishment, not political consultants, not professional staffers. I mean, that's a world that I operate in a lot more than you do.
Yeah.
You're like on the ground with culture, like with people who are just hearing anecdotally stuff from politics, that aren't living and breathing stuff. And I think it's why you've had such a profound influence. But where is this heading, man? Like, can Latinos fix this? Can we fix both parties? Can we say enough to both sides?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Latinos can. Like, I think it's going to be Latinos who do it. And that's sort of, I mean, that's a big theme in your book as well. And so, look, it has to be a block that's powerful enough to hold both parties accountable. And if you're being honest, I mean, Latinos are right there right now and in a position to do that. We saw that with the last election. Whether or not those parties see the changes they need to make right away, I think that remains to be seen. I think we'll learn a little bit from Democrats come the next presidential election, but I'm not optimistic it's going to happen yet. I think Democrats still might take another licking before they really start evaluating.
I agree. I agree.
And I think, and I've seen you say this, and I agree with what you're saying, which is Republicans have done this in a different way, where they think they're winning Latinos because of their policies necessarily, right? So they say, oh, we've done really good with Latinos, so they absolutely love everything we're doing. But really, it's Democrats are just so bad at what they're doing. It's driven a lot of Latinos away, which doesn't say much for Republicans, but it really doesn't say much for Democrats.
Amen. Well said.
And so, I think Democrats are going to have to figure out a way to win some of them back, because I think that there is that other wing of the Latino population that's pro-union. They want to trust government to help with economic issues or social services and things like that, right? And even I'm saying this as a libertarian, right? And I've thought about this a lot over the years, where I used to just think government was just terrible no matter what, right? I was never an anarchist, but I've always thought, and I still think the less government, the better. But our framers did create a framework where we're supposed to have a government we can at least trust and is the people by the people, right? And so I think it's really important to elect good leaders who go in there and treat the institution the way it should be. And I think to that extent, you can argue that Latinos are the most optimistic of everybody, because when you poll them, they are the most optimistic about government being able to help solve some of these issues.
Yep.
And I think when you look at, like, by extension, if you look at Mexico, for example, and you make this case as well, that, they elect women leaders at higher rates than other demos. And you've got, like, their president, like, she doesn't go marching around at quinces and all this to win votes. She's light skinned. She has a last name that I think that's not Mexican. And she did fine getting elected, right?
Yeah.
And so I think they just want honesty and people that they can trust. And I think the first party that figures that out, it shouldn't be a hard equation to solve, but it is when you're used to seeing things through a political prism. I think that'll be the party that wins.
I think, brother, you're right. This has been a fascinating conversation, Brandon. I could go on for a couple more hours with you. We will go on for a couple more hours, but I do have to bring this podcast to a close. I've been talking with Brandon Loran Maxwell, documentarian, author, political essayist, commentator, and as I like to describe, just overall Renaissance man and a big brain, a big thinker. You can find a lot of his writings on the Daily Chela if you are on Substack, or just Google it and find some of these writings. The book, Bomb the Wall, from the Beltway to Musings from the Beltway to the Barrio, is available on Amazon now. Pick up a copy. You will be very impressed and inspired, and you will find stuff that you love, that you hate, but you will get a sense of the thinking of a man who I believe really has his finger on the pulse of the Latino culture in a very unique way that nobody in politics is thinking about. Brandon, it's been a real pleasure, brother. I'm looking forward to hopefully working with you on future projects. We want to have you back on the show with Chuck, especially as we get closer to the election, because again, we want to get some people who are closer to the community than we are in a non-political way to give us some of your political observations. And I appreciate you. I appreciate everything you're doing out there.
Well, I appreciate you having me on the show, and I wish you guys nothing but success on your future endeavors, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks, Brandon.